Welcome back, everyone. I'm Angela Black. This show is called At This Moment. It's here every Thursday night, 10 p.m. Eastern / 7 p.m. Pacific, here on Studio B on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the number one 100% listener-supported radio station on the planet. And I'd like to welcome back to the show, W, Intelligence Insider. Welcome back, W.
Hey. Glad to be here.
Listen, I had a private question come from somebody that I know who is more informed on many things than I am. And he says, with regard to the Russian Ruble operation, what can you tell me about Leo Wanta? Does that make any sense to you? I have no idea what he's talking about.
Well, Leo was one of the operators, and he deserves his day and was an integral part of what transpired. Like so many of the players, they come from a lot of different places, and they have a lot of different expertise and contacts. And so when you're working a project like this, you'll have lots of different guys coming at it from different angles. And some work better than others. And some guys might even not have the best hand in the card game, but they're better with their poker face and end up with more chips in front of them than other guys who have better hands but don't know how to play them well.
Mm-hmm.
And Leo is a guy that was very good. And so someday when, if we prevail and we get to write the true history, there's a lot of players that will be given more of the accolades that they deserve, even though for the moment it's easy to discredit them or flush what they have to say down the toilet. And, as much as it looks like any one person can be the one that did it, I go back to what really took down the Russian economy. It was multiple things. It wasn't just the activities or operations of just one guy or group. Could it have been done just on the religious side and those players that played their parts there? No. Could it have been done with the operations in Afghanistan and South America to push back in those places? No, it couldn't have. We had to hit them on multiple fronts. And even within those places of engagement, there were multiple players playing their part. I believe that at some point when the true history is written, if we prevail, remember the victors get to write the history. We don't win this over the next couple decades. Somebody else will write the history, and a lot of the players will be forgotten.
It was very interesting to hear. It was very interesting to hear you say that, if we win and have the opportunity to write the true history, that just really resonated with me on such a level, because I think you're right. You're obviously right. He who wins the game gets to write the book, I guess. I mean, that is at least told to the masses. So that's very interesting.
Well, and the only thing I would say, there's a number of people that did incredible work in their various areas. I'm thinking right now of a friend who was engaged in the drug wars, and he was a phenomenal person, unbelievable. He died ingloriously, with our penal system on his heels, and even his wife thought he was a horrible person. And the reality was he was playing a part, and he was playing it to win. And there was nothing that was beyond the pale, if you will, in order to prevail, because he did understand that this was for all the marbles. And he found himself in world-changing situations where even the President of the United States went on national TV using some of what he generated to help explain the story to the American people. And yet, to this day, his own family thinks he was a bad guy. And that story somewhere hopefully will be told, and he will be understood to have been the person he was. I mean, he should be a star on the wall at Langley, but he's not. And at least not at this time, because for the moment, the history records him as a bad guy. And yet he was one of the greatest warriors and, you know, really one of the great generals in the war to engage the Russians and Chinese in South America to win. There was a number of guys that I put in that same category, that some that made it, but, you know, really losing most of their life and most of their possessions, having to start almost with nothing. Because remember, when you live for years and years or a decade or two with a cover, a history that is ultimately a fabrication, if you try to disengage, go back and just have a regular life, you don't have any real credentials. You don't have anything you can refer to. If you, for some reason, are on the out, how do you create valid fake credentials you can use? All of a sudden, you're at everybody's mercy. And if you're out, you don't get anything. You got to start from zero, and you have missing time that you can't explain. So for guys that go do these things, if they're successful and everybody's still happy with them, somewhere in there's a history that they can refer to, and people will back them up, and they can go on and have life. I'm thinking even now of another friend who was involved in UN activities, Canadian. And at the end of the work he did, which was about a dozen years in the Mideast, he was injured very severely in a helicopter crash. Was in the hospital for almost a year and a half. When he came back out to have a life, he had like $1,100 a month, had no money left of his own money because they spent most all of it putting him back together and keeping him functioning, keeping his houses and things like that, and got divorced. His kid died in a very difficult situation his only son. Completely on his own with all the help I could throw in there and some redirection. It took him about 15 years to get to where he has a steady income, credentialing, et cetera. In fact, he's doing very specific work for the FBI, training work now, but he had to go a very conventional method to get to the point where he could even be in the game again. So he didn't just have the years that he did the work, he had the years to rebuild afterwards. So here's a guy that started in his early 20s and he's in his late 50s before he even starts having an earning career and a history that allows him to have a life. Guys make sacrifices to be in these places, and then they come out and they want to go do something else. You're kind of locked in. I'm thinking also of our GRS guys, Global Response Staff, you know, the guys in Benghazi that were killed. Those were Global Response Staff guys. The saying is, when your country's in trouble or your people are in trouble that are doing your spy work, you send in James Bond. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if James Bond gets in trouble, who do they send in to save James Bond? Well, in the case of our guys, our State Department guys, our intelligence guys, field guys, they send in GRS. They're the rescue squad for our James Bonds, if you will. Those guys have histories that are extremely hard to track, even between players. A lot of the guys you worked with, you don't know their real name. Once you're out, they could be anywhere in the world. You're not sharing information because you could screw a guy up if you got caught, and what you don't know you can't say. Mm-hmm. So you're working with a guy, you're best friends, you love the guy, you'll take a bullet for him, and at the end of the day, you don't actually know who he really is. You'll never see him again. maybe you will, and then you won't even talk to him as you cross in the mall, because I remember crossing paths with a guy that was a very close friend of mine, and we locked eyes in an airport. Neither of us could know the other guy wasn't in the middle of some kind of an operation, and we'd blow the other guy's cover. So we looked, had a eye blink, and continued on our ways.
Wow.
We didn't know if we would blow the other guys. I mean, this is somebody I wanted to have a beer so bad with him, sit and talk, and just, but that's that world. And for most people, they can't understand being in that kind of a world. And once you're on to the next thing, in one period, you might be doing stuff related to moving chemicals for drug companies, related to the drug trade, and later you're doing the finance stuff, and later you're rubbing shoulders with politicians, or you're in a military setting. Not very many guys transit through all those things that much, but over a career, you may be 3, 4, 5 different guys. Some guys, if they're extremely committed, might be 10 guys. And you get to the end of all that, and nobody will ever know truly what exactly happened, even of your own family. So, for example, in my case, I have a trusted ally who runs a museum and has a lot of artifacts. And so in his case, not for today, but for somewhere down the road, not even necessarily my kids right now, I hope to live a long time still, but maybe for my grandkids, and later to understand that history, I made very detailed video recordings, and then provided documents in various places so that they could be pulled together at some later point in time to be understood, to put things in perspective.
Wow, that's great.
For my own family as much as anything, not because even within your own family, I can tell you that just like so many of your listeners, your own family probably thinks you're off your rocker a lot of times because you say this and that, and you've heard this and that. Well, believe me, in a guy like my case, that's almost it on steroids. Where have you been? What are you doing? Well, I thought you were doing this, or you're there. Why didn't you come back for this? So it makes you have to live a different life.
Well, if I may, I would like to jump back a notch and kind of relate what you're talking about now with crisis actors. And I know that is very low on the totem pole, obviously, as far as covert lives.
No, it's as high as it. No.
Oh, really?
This is one of the greatest crises that we, at not just the national level, but at the global level, are facing right now. I think the crisis actor thing, the staged events, is the most serious aspect of the gamesmanship, the plays that are maneuvering us in the world right now. It may be the most important life and death subject that we need to be reconsidering and looking at again.
Wow. And now one of the chatters in the chat room here is asking who pays and how do they pay these crisis actors? Where are they getting their income? I mean, where's that paycheck coming from?
Well, and I apologize, I got a little bit of a cold. It may not be so much a cold, just talking too much, but let me just put it to you this way. There was never any budget from any federal agency other than administration budget for any of the work we did to take down the ruble. With incredible billions of billions of billions having actually changed hands. One of the best examples of that is your listeners can Google the National Reconnaissance Office building in Washington, D.C. Here's a $400 million building.
The National Reconnaissance?
And one day, National Reconnaissance Office. Mm-hmm. It was a $400 million building being constructed in downtown Washington, D.C., 20 years ago. And one day, a senator goes by and says, do you know what that building is? I don't know what that building is. What are they making there? I don't even know what that's all about. We have this big project going here in Washington, D.C. I don't even know about it. I'm a senator. I don't know what's going on. So he starts making the inquiries. And come to find out, well, it's for the National Reconnaissance Office. Well, which budget's it in? They couldn't even find the budget it was in. It was hidden in there. There's a lot of activity that takes place that the budgets, they get money from other stuff and other stuff, and next thing you know, it's lost its way, and somebody's got a project going that nobody's actually fully accountable or in charge of. There is, at this moment in time, enough money out there floating around that's not accountable in what we would consider the normal way, that there's all sorts of activities taking place that you wouldn't agree with as a citizen, yet you're technically on the hook for it somehow, or something that's done in your name has somehow funded it. So, and the way I would look at it is this: it's not even just the crisis actors themselves. Let's step back even one step further, something more easily looked at. Is Homeland Security a legitimate constitutional entity?
Highly doubtful.
And if it is not, what are you going to do to stop it? How are you going to stop it? How are you going to pull it back?
Mm-hmm.
Look at what's happened with the centralization of all of our intelligence gathering agencies, all of our policing agencies under Homeland Security. And there is, to me, a very good case to be made, a conversation to be had, that Homeland Security was bought and paid for, sold to us as the American people on a lot of false premise. Even the use of events like Oklahoma City, Waco, 9/11 to concoct and create scenarios where the American people who had been gamed would buy into stuff because it was what had to be done based on what happened, and were sold a bill of goods. This moment that we're in right now, I actually think, unfortunately, that we are past the point of reeling it in.
Mm-hmm.
And that it will get far, far, far more serious before we get even a prayer of a chance to call this one back. And it doesn't just go back to the events of the last decade or two or three even. You can go back to Pearl Harbor. Our politicians are systemed, machined. The various intelligence apparatus and hidden hands, fraternal organizations that have worked behind the scenes because they're smarter, wiser, know what we really need better than we do, have created scenarios, played out plots to get us to go along with what they believe that we ultimately need or somebody needs. And at the end of the game, if you step back far enough, as one of my mentors said 40 years ago, 45 years ago, you're not thinking big enough. You can't think too big. You have to get farther back and get the big picture. You're too close in. And as you step back and realize what's really going on, this isn't about who runs Washington, D.C. and makes a few bucks, which family gets the better house in Houston or, Washington, D.C. or some other place. Even about the Russians and the Chinese and the Americans and all the other plots that you think it's about. This is about playing all of us across the whole planet with the objective of eliminating individual nation states and recreating, plowing the face of the earth and recreating the world, a new world order. They've said it to you 1,000 times. This is not about just fixing the world for democracy or reinventing communism. This is about reinventing the whole world. And those players involved are working together, not just across county lines or state lines, or even political lines, or even nation-state lines. They're doing family stuff where they have positions of authority in multiple countries between the various family members, associates, and with the intent that they will manage us to the position of a new world order for all of our good. And, oh, by the way, those that don't want to be part of it, that's fine. We understand, and we'll help you get out of the way.
Mm-hmm. And if I may,
that getting out of the way means eliminating you. Yes, go ahead.
So we're looking at, geoengineering. We're looking at genetically modified weather warfare, droughting out entire nations, wiping out entire economies and nations, killing off, the masses. But weather war is huge, and I think a definite part of this. And I wanted to kind of jump over to, Texas right now, and of course the flooding, et cetera, and then the Jade Helm exercises that are coming up. If you're ready for that, if I didn't jump too quickly, I know we were, you're really painting a great picture.
Even more important than all of those things, even more important than Jade Helm or even the weather wars in Texas. My gosh, has anybody seen the front page news the last few days? Are you paying attention? Do you realize that in asymmetrical warfare, one of the most effective places to engage your audience is where they spend most of their time? Go look at your friends and your neighbors. Now, here in the U.S., we watch football. Well, across the rest of the world, they watch football. But it's a different kind of football. What's been going on? We're having a little attack on the soccer moguls. Well, it's a political thing. Our Justice Department is saving the world for honest soccer. Yeah, we're also engaging. Where's the next two World Cups? Qatar, which is the connection to Iran. Where was Valerie Jarrett going to the secret meetings with the Iranians prior to the last election to try and meet with the Iranians and work out a deal so that Obama could have a nuclear weapons deal before the election to help boost him over the top? It was in Qatar. Okay, where was some of the stuff going on that was related to the arms flow going out of Benghazi and up to take out Syria? It was Qatar. So where's the other next World Cup? It's Russia. We're having a little battle over and what's the whole World Cup thing about? Taking bribes to determine the next place where the World Cup finals will be played. So asymmetrical warfare. So Russia got the World Cup, Qatar got the World Cup. There's some bribes that took place. Who's going to take care of it? The American Justice Department. What's going to be the tit for tat? This is like if we take out a spy ring in Washington or in New York or California or Seattle. What happens? Well, and the Russians, they know where some of our spies are over there. So then they out one of our Air Force colonels that's doing work for the State Department in Russia, and next thing you know, he's a spy and he's being expelled from the country. We're taking him on in the World Soccer thing. What do you think the Russians and some of the Mideast people are going to do in retaliation? They'll find some legal political thing in the same kind of a thing to accuse American business people or politicians of being involved in some type of corruption that they know full well exists. If I was Hillary Clinton, I'd be very worried because they're going to want to out somebody else tit for tat. asymmetrical warfare. You don't realize, you're looking at stuff and you don't realize how at other levels there is stuff going on that does relate in very bizarre ways to this bigger battle. Because at some level, these families are using every available tool, and they've got their agent provocateurs in places all over the place that you wouldn't in the normal sense. But why is something like, say, soccer so important? Because it has the news. It has people's attention. It has their emotions. And if you can get their attention in some disparate location, you can redirect it eventually to something useful that you want it to do. Little bits, but large numbers. And it helps you over time. Russia bad, America good. Type of thing to get to play you, because every war is a propaganda war first. Mm-hmm. Before you actually have guns engaging each other anywhere, you first have to have the propaganda. So now let's jump around and come back to Jade Helm. Within this community, the listeners that you have, most of them have been very played, wound up, hyperventilated about the Jade Helm stuff. And of course, the Texas aspects of Jade Helm are pretty interesting. Texas, technically, we call it a state, but it's actually its own country in very real legal sense. And if any country or any state wanted to secede from the country and do it rather smoothly, the one state that's pretty well positioned to do just exactly that, if they really got in a tizzy, is probably Texas. So the whole idea of Jade Helm occurring as though something's happening with Texas and playing out, at one level you say, well, they're just practicing and everything else. Well, what do we do when we want to send a shot across the bow to Russia or China or some little teeny country that did something that pissed us off? We send our fleet to nearby waters and then have a naval training exercise.
Right.
So what are you doing with Texas and the politicians if you're having Jade Helm there? And the whole scenario is that there's a secession thing that we got to put down, some type of resistance that's trying to break off or something.
And then with the go ahead.
Well, and so again, this is kind of a shot across the bow, but the other side of the coin is it's a totally legitimate activity. If our guys don't train, you're not ready for the real scenario. If they didn't have things like Jade Helm, training exercises, and they weren't huge, large, we wouldn't be prepared for an earthquake, some natural event, a sunspot, something that nobody saw coming out of left field, the New Madrid going off or something else, or even just the flooding like we've had with the weather stuff, weather war or not. So is it appropriate, intelligent, far-sighted to have these type of training exercises? Hey, if there had been a Jade Helm a year before Katrina, would the deaths that occurred at Katrina maybe have been mitigated? Well, in a perfect world, yes. So these types of training operations are hard to, really say they're evil dastardly when you can make a pretty good case that we should be doing stuff like that. The question is, is it, just like our naval exercises off, at the edge of the China Sea? Are those sending a message to China, or are they legitimate? Because we've got to work in waters everywhere to find out how things work and show the flag. You can make a legitimate case one way, but in reality, in those smoke-filled rooms, even if it's just the e-vapor cigarette smoke at this point, the long and short of it is, it's really to send a message, but with some plausible denial. And would I be watching that and concerned about it? Yes. Is this the big one and it's going to turn into something else? I can guarantee on the numbers, not happening as much as I could guarantee on Ebola, not happening. It's not now. It's not the time. There is a very precise dating formula sequence that these masterminds are following.
Mm-hmm.
And just like 9/11 could not happen on 9/10 or 9/12, could not even happen on the afternoon of 9/11. It had to happen with precision, exactly at the moment that it happened. And that was in place for a very, very, very long time, not just a decade or two.
Mm-hmm.
When you understand that, and you understand the magnitude of the threat, the length, the depth that they have on the bench of the players, you begin to get an understanding. Yes, you're going to have a new world order, a global order. A lot of people are going to be involved. And it's going to take time. And the people that are looking for the next 9/11, not the next 9/11. There'll be another 9/11 type event. It's all that's left in the interim while the big changes happen. That event just becomes the logic to justify some of the other stuff. And then you have multiple in order to, just like ringing a bell correctly, you don't ring a bell one big, huge whack. You start resonating it with little taps and get it moving and moving and moving, and then you can hit it harder without breaking it once you've got the bell already beginning to be rung. You don't just whack a bell cold or it breaks.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we are being wrapped repeatedly, and we're resonating, and there are raps that are harder than others to really get the sound up. So
interesting. So, I've got another question coming up, but I just wanted to say, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with the Jade Helm situation? You know, there's just so much flying all around the internet, and every truther and every non-truther, et cetera. Is there anything else that like the audience to know, regarding Jade Helm?
I think that it's absolutely valid to be monitoring, recording, documenting what's happening, both by people observing from the outside and by people on the inside. Those people are our neighbors. They're our friends. They're Americans too. And like so many people, even the responders on 9/11 there at the towers, those guys would blow off conspiracy to the moon up to a certain point, and now a lot of them go, you know what? Now that I put all the pieces back together, I ain't buying anything. I was part of a scam. So, we do need to be vigilant, but probably not doing anything to actually stop it or impede it, and let the dust settle. They're not taking over Texas or the country right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not happening this fall.
Yeah, it is a training exercise, but it's not just a training exercise for the military. It's obviously, a way to start to, get the public ready, as well. So you're right about the resonating, the bell, starting small. So Jade Helm is, probably, in the early stages of the bell ringing is what you're saying, not quite in the middle yet, and definitely not
the resonating thing. Let's put it this way. Let's just hypothetically say that I'm correct, that the Boston bombing never, ever, ever happened the way you heard it happened on the news with the video, with the trial and somebody convicted.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen. So then those troop carriers running around chasing down the guys and, beating down doors and searching and everything else. All those honest guys, honest police officers, agencies, were they evil conscripts, sold their soul to the devil to be part of it? Or were they played too? And if they were, as they look at it and look again, I'm just asking all of your listeners to think again. And then even if you drink the Kool-Aid with me, if you will, this isn't about becoming Chicken Little, screaming the sky is falling and everything else. When you're in real combat, the real thing, real bullets flying, and trust me, you are right now. We are all in combat for our hearts, minds, souls, as much as any conflict that's ever happened on the planet. But you can trust your senses and get dead. Because if you're in a city complex type of environment and you hear sniper bullets, you hear machine gun fire, you hear footsteps, the reflections off the walls, the mirrored sounds can cause you to act exactly the wrong way. You have to check with your other people, because as you add several people with what they hear, you may get a different report, a different understanding. And so sometimes you can't even trust your own ears or your own eyes. And that's why you have hand signals between each other. That's why you communicate. And you have multiple people, and you trust your other guys, and you work together because you have a greater likelihood, not a guarantee, of survival and of winning. We need to be attentive, watching, listening, understanding these things. As Reagan would say, trust but verify. The intent's good and the plan's important. Okay, well, I trust you on that, and then verify. And these next weeks and months, even into the next year, are about verifying that what was sold to us for Jade Helm, etc., was in fact, accurate and true, and that it doesn't go off the rails. We are being played, and we can't even trust our own senses or beliefs, and we have to be careful more than anything else, not even just about ourselves, but the people around us. See, the biggest concern I have for this audience is that they drink the Kool-Aid, if you will, and then commit themselves, a bull's going to wipe the country out once we get in the bunkers, and we've got to start eating the canned food and make sure that there's enough top ramen to get through the next year. Okay? Rats peeled right and cooked correctly are okay on your top ramen. All right, whatever. You'd be through the top ramen by now. You're just popping your head out of the bunker, expecting to see nobody around left alive except for zombies, and they'd be going, what the heck are you doing? In the meantime, while some of these people were acting that way, I can tell you I've had the top down on my convertible probably 100 times in the last few months. I've enjoyed many steak dinners. I mowed the lawn. I have a new grandchild showing up shortly. I am still breathing in the aluminized
nanoparticles,
micron-sized particulates, and with the danger of Alzheimer's, but I'm still breathing the air. Look, we have to take a deep breath, pace ourselves, understand the threats, understand how they could morph and morph very quickly, but not be so quick to cause the herd to stampede. Be a bit more measured and not so easily manipulated by the people who would like to do just that with us. There's a saying, you can't con an honest man. Every flim-flam guy knows. You go to try to sell something that's too good to be true to an honest man, and he sees it coming. He doesn't want to get advantage over his neighbor. He is hesitant to buy into it because why? Because he's not a con himself. But a guy that's into making the fact buck, he's gonna he gets a chance to put something over on his neighbor. As the Bible says, at the time of the end, when you're living in your houses built on top of houses in your cities, and it's, chat meals every night, the specific scripture is, every man oppressed by his neighbor. Every man oppressed by his neighbor. That's federal taxes. That's getting something for nothing. I can get free money from the government. Well, where'd it come from? It came from your neighbor who's working. And then he's getting his, house subsidized with a government loan from your working. And some other guy is got the con going where both of you think that you're getting the fat one over on them, and he's the politician getting the payback on the backside, not to himself, of course, but to his family members. And by the way, the other scripture I just love to note, what was the description of Judas's place amongst the disciples? It says that for he held the bag. See, people would come and they'd get offerings, a pence here, a little bit there, something to have food for the apostles when they went to the city spreading the good news. And Christ would stand there, and the woman came and put in her 2 coins that wouldn't even buy a bird. And next to nothing. And they thought, well, this isn't even worth our time to take this offering. It's so little, why would we even want that? And Christ says, because for her, it was all that she had. Mm-hmm. And so here's Judas. He holds the bag. Now, did he put any money in the bag? No. He just held the bag. When people had an offering, they put the money in there. But when they came to go buy the food for the apostles, when the apostles came and Christ said, well, go get some money from Judas and go get us bread and meat because we have a journey to the next city. So they'd come to Judas, hey, I need some money for this or that. He held the bag and he'd reach in. Who was giving the money? Judas was giving the money. He held the bag. Why did he get that job? Because he wanted that job. He loved the silver. And when it came time to sell out, he loved the silver. He held the bag. He wanted more in the bag. That's politicians. They don't put any money in the coffers. Yet, our politician is so great. He just got us this money for a bridge. He's the greatest politician ever. We're putting his name on the side of the building. That highway is named after him because he's the one that went to Washington and brought back the bacon. And our politician's better than your politician because more bacon shows up in our district than in your district. And we got this aircraft job and this missile job and this other government job. Our politicians are more crookeder than your politicians, and that's the way it is. They're all mob. And so when you start looking at it that way, even your listeners, so they're going to get a Social Security payment, and it'll take care of them the rest of their life, and they've got their retirement plan, but they also got their Social Security plan. They're being conned. In Thailand, I was there one time, and they have these monkeys, little rhesus monkeys. And so when they want to catch them, what they do is they take a little bamboo shoots, they tie them together and make a little basket out of it. And in the middle of the basket, they would put an orange, a tangerine, which these little rhesus monkeys, they go crazy for tangerine. They're like catnip to cats. So they throw it with a rope out. It's just a little ball with a tangerine in it. They throw it out by the tree where these monkeys are. The monkeys come down out of the tree and they fight over who's going to get their hand in there and get their hand on that tangerine. They get it in there and they get a hold of it and they go to pull the tangerine out. Well, the basket is woven in such a way that it's just big enough for the monkey to get his hand in there, not big enough to pull the tangerine out. They're trying to pull it out. What do? Now you reel in the rope. The monkey won't let go of the tangerine. He's got that tangerine. He's not letting go of it for nothing. All those other monkeys are too slow. He beat them all. He gets back to the guy that's got it. The guy lifts it up, drops it into a cage, kaplunk. He loses his grip on the tangerine, and now he's captive in the cage. That's all of you listeners right now. Mm-hmm. They're all tangerine grabbers. Y'all thought you were going to get something for nothing. Your country's been stolen out from underneath you. It's a captured operation at every level. Every level. Media, politicians, the military, the intelligence agencies. You can't go anywhere, and I can't make a solid case it's a captured operation. They captured you. They captured your mind. You can't trust anything you hear or see or believe it 100% because it's pretty much all lies at this point in time. And in the meantime, a handful of players have stolen your country. And what's their goal? You think you're protecting your kids' future and you're making sure your retirement's there and that the government's working to put stoplights in at the intersections so cars don't crash against each other. In the meantime, they're reshaping the whole planet in anticipation of their 1,000-year Reich, their 1,000 years of peace. And the reason there's going to be peace is because a war is about to take place on this planet. A series of wars that really is just one war. And at the end of it, in their Nazi dreams, they will still be here, and the rest of you will be plowed into the ground as fertilizer, and they'll start over with their 500 million people, their families, their genetics, their ideals, their grandchildren. They're in, you're out. That's the way they see it.
Really, so all of these, smaller events, obviously compared to what you're talking about, whether it's Jade Helm, whether it's, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, whether it's geoengineering, which, by the way, in my opinion, is the main tool. It's one of the very main tools of wiping out, life as we know it on the planet today. This type of life. So, all these things are, except for in my opinion, the climate control is really it's the main tool, I would say, the main tool.
Well, let's back up for a second. It's an important point here. On 9/11 was so critical that even though there was a primary operation in play to bring down the buildings for symbology's sake, to play a certain thing, there was backups. There was not just one way to complete those events. There was backups for the backups because everything, unlike some of the other stuff, hinged on that day. There's a lot of stuff that's squishy, that you got to be in a zone, you got to pull it off. Ideally, you're pulling it off exactly this way on the state for all sorts of symbolic or technical reasons. And then there's other stuff that, you could be a different date that's not the primary and still fit the overall scenario. 9/11 wasn't one of those. So it had backups for the backups for the backups to make sure it played out correctly. In what we see, whether it be geoengineering, things going on with genetic engineering, with the play out for required vaccines, some of the politics with Agenda 21, even the behind things stuff with the energy stuff and who's going to be able to sell energy to the world, et cetera, Fukushima, other things. The reality is they have multiple things in play that if for any reason Plan A falls behind or doesn't work, Plan B or Plan C can then still be engaged and they lose little, if any, momentum. The job is going to be completed one way or the other, and they can land on a different foot. And at the end of the day, too, the other thing that people have to be aware of, we're really down to two families that are playing through this scenario. And those two families, this is not like a lot of your people would think it is. This is not a cage fight to the death. This is, and they speak about this within their own groups in this way, this is a battle to be on top with a very sexual connotation. Who gets to be on top? In the understandings of how the world went wrong in a lot of the Hasidic Jews talk about this, that in this time before the earth was plowed, this pre-Adamic period, that the reason the world was destroyed was because the woman wanted to be on top. And that was the cause of the destruction of the world. It sounds very simplistic, very childistic, It's taking something very complex and reducing it down to something very, very, simple, but also with a lot of twists and connotations to it. But within these families, they do not see this as a battle to the death. They see this as who gets to be on top in this next cycle of the world, this next iteration of how we as people are defined, who survives.
And you're saying it's two families?
The world we're in.
You're saying it's two.
It is down to two families right now. Everybody's had to take a side, and they're within those two families now.
Could you elaborate? Because I'm aware of 5 families, 13 families, 1 family. So
there's
me,
13 primary families, and within those 13 families, they're down to 2 groups, and your listeners are astute enough, and I'm not bashing any particular group, because there's those that say they're Jews and they're not. It's the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And the Rothschild way of viewing things is a very classic: you own the land, you control the land. If you control the land, if you own the land, if you own what's under the land, the raw resources, the raw materials of production, it doesn't matter what anybody wants to do. They have to go through you. You're the gatekeeper to any kind of production. The Rockefeller model, as we know it specifically here in this country, and there's other stuff that plays, and I'm being very simplistic, but I'm just using Rockefeller because they're really the figurehead at this point in time for a group of families. Mm-hmm. They're only about a third by actual wealth, real numbers, the size of the Rothschilds, who have the real depth, ultimately. And they ultimately are an offshoot of the Rothschild family, so they're a branch at some level. But they control the technology. They control the science, the things that allow you to control almost from an education standpoint, the machinery of production. Not the raw resources, but the machinery. And that zone in the middle that they both play into is the right to both access the raw materials of production and to convert it into usable goods. And so in this playing through for the future of the world, they each have different perspectives on who would win for what reason. Is the future of the world going to be based on who controls the technology or who controls the raw resources? And they're having a tussle, but it's a family feud fight, and at the end of the day, they're both going to get pleasure out of it, because even if one dominates and ends up on top, they're both going to have a very productive, exasperating, fun time. And that's and with a very serious total sexual connotation. And not taking that lightly. I'm not blowing past it. That's exactly the way they see this. And so in doing these conflicts, these tit for tat, they're getting pleasure out of it, because they know that even if they lose, they win.
Right. And just so you know, we have about a minute left. So, and that is, it's funny because you were saying that the Rothschilds that the Rockefellers are an offshoot of the Rothschilds. Yeah. So there's basically one family. I mean, really, but you're saying so.
At the end of the day, that's it. It's incestuous, but that's the whole nature of the whole thing.
Right.
It is an incestuous relationship, because just like all the way back to the Caesars and Rome, they all married their relatives. They all married their cousins. They're all related to each other. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Keep it in the family.
Wow. So any last thoughts for the listeners, W? It's been such a pleasure. A very deep conversation. I don't know if pleasure is necessarily a key word there, but, it's just been very informative and, really deep, man. Any last words for the listeners?
My prayers are with all of your listeners. At the end of the day, you can't con an honest man. You need to be honest with your maker and look for direction, because that's the only place you're going to get what you need to survive.
Wow. Wise words from W, the intelligence insider. Thank you so much, W, for joining me tonight.
All right.
All right, everyone. All right. So, yeah, get right with your God, get right with your soul. And that's the bottom line here, everyone. All right. Major Tom and Keith up next on Studio A. See y'all soon. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon.
Listening to Revolution Radio.
There is no good and evil. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Be sure to tune in weekdays 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time for Strange Universe with Sean David Morton. A strange, interesting, and engaging wide variety of topics. So be here. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Join the Sacred Matrix with hosts Janet Kira Lesson and Dr. Sasha Lesson, 6 p.m. Eastern Time here on Revolution Radio.
Here we free ourselves from the God spell, transform the perverted matrix to the divine one. We become conscious and we embrace universal, unlimited love.
We feature colorful guests and topics such as extraterrestrials, ghosts, interdimensionals, and aliens. We examine evidence, anomalies, archaeological ruins, and anthropology.
We explore past lives, future lives, life between lives. We get into astral projection, near-death experiences, archetypes, visions, and dreams.
Episodes include time travel, teleportation, counseling, spirituality, tantra, relationships, peace, shamanism, peak experiences, and ego transcendence.
Join the lessons Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com for the Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love.